Oh, I do have it.
Like what?
I have her phone number.
You have a phone number?
I do.
Let's call her.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you have this way.
Do I have her phone?
It is a certain.
Yeah, because I just want her to try it.
There's not many,
But you should have your phone. Are you going to use
you know, my doctor, who I'm very close to, on social media.
Oh, right.
All right, anything that should happen, you know, like when we say statistically speaking. I said, I worry about A, because I know if something's happening to me, I said, every time I watch it carefully, I get
My David's wife is doctor. Miriam's David's wife is Sharon. Got it.
Let's see. I've never made an international call from my cell
Oh,
phone.
should I try to find David's number? Oh, there he is. I'll find. I got it. David doesn't have it. She has the URL already. She just needs to find it. I just want to see if she can get the picture. Call her on her phone. Oh, she got it. She says we're hearing you.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Wait, what? How is she Skyping?
Okay.
No, see, no one's watching.
No, no one's there.
No, right there.
What?
No one's seen it.
Where? Oh, yeah, because it needs to. She can hear it. She says so. That's all I can do. I mean,
Can she hear that?
so at 11:39, she said we're hearing you.
Do you want me to ask her anything else?
Just ask if she can see the curtain. seeing what we're seeing in this picture. So when this curtain comes up, then somebody, whoever's speaking up there, will get
So
sent
she's seeing
all
that.
the way to
She
Israel.
says it's switching from the funeral home to the house last night.
Okay, that's weird.
That's what I just wrote. All right, I'm gonna stand. Is this a picture?
Yeah, stand there. Tell her not to push any of the buttons that say Liz's live stream, because that's the house last night recording. That's a recording.
So can she see me? Wait, Mama. So she's seeing that. She's
She should. Ideally, yes. Then in Israel, they should see that.
Is she hot?
I tested it
Yeah.
this morning and it worked.
Let's see what she says.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Somebody's there to help, make sure all the food is out and that help clean up and all that.
Oh, she can see you.
Yay! Okay, it's working. That's awesome.
Let's see.
Okay, what she said. All right. And was it Daddy? No.
So far, so good.
Yay!
I'm just going to tell her when the service stops. When the service starts, I don't want to leave my ringers. Does she have a way of communicating? She loses.
If she goes through my phone, it's going to be recording, so that wouldn't be a good thing. Turned off my ringer. Maybe you could put yours on vibrate?
Yeah.
That was his son. That was his son.
So,
So,
Oh, one
so
person is
I
watching.
should sit over here then.
Yeah,
Say something.
I could just say this to you, right, Sharon? Sharon, if you can hear me.
there is a delay though.
Oh.
You can't really have a conversation.
Okay.
Oh, Mom.
Yeah.
People are sending you on
Look up
WhatsApp.
above.
Look up above.
But that's the second thing. Someone sent you something before that.
look
What-
up above.
What is look up above?
Does she want to see the view up above?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
YH. What is YH? They're going through the funeral WhatsApp.
We can hear you.
They say they can hear us. Hi Galit.
Who's Galit?
That's David Elkin's
She
daughter.
says, okay, so I'm gonna try.
What do they mean by? What do you
Okay.
guys mean by look up?
Here, I'll ask.
Just WhatsApp us and tell you what you mean by look up.
We need to get you on that WhatsApp stream, but I don't know how to.
You just add her number to it.
You add her number to it?
Yes.
I don't want to touch this now because it's working.
Right.
Okay, just go out and ask them if you can still see.
Well, I just asked her.
Jeremy had.
Is he on the funeral stream?
No, or did David set it up without Jeremy?
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, I know. I can ask them to.
Can you
invite me to
hear
the funeral
us?
stream.
Oh, there you go.
How old is Galit?
I don't know.
Galit, how old are
There,
you?
that's her father right there. You can go ask him.
Oh, Willner.
Willner wants to know the link. I wrote.
What?
Fast. I sent him the link in his email. I emailed him the link.
Willner?
My Willner.
Oh.
My brother.
David can add Will.
David can add Willner. What? 23?
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Oh, Galit is 20.
Oh, Galit is 23.
You guys, Oh, well.
Can you tell David? I don't want to use my phone. Can you tell David Willner that I sent it to him at his Gmail? You need to move away, please, because you're kicking this. That link doesn't behave very well.
Okay.
Jeremy has his phone on him. Okay, 1 second.
Let's go find Jeremy. Oh, wait, what did that say?
Hi.
Wilner, it's in your email.
Wait, what did he say?
Oh, it just said Wilner, it's in your email. Sharon something said
Wait,
that.
what?
Sharon Elkins said, Wilner, it's in your email.
Willner.
Hi.
I forwarded you the link that everybody's using, David.
Peace.
Are you on that funeral WhatsApp chain? Okay. Only David Elkins isn't, because they're trying to like WhatsApp me through my phone, but I don't want to take it down now and do it in order to. Did they add you?
I asked them to, but they haven't yet. Are you on that group?
All right.
Don't. I hope we aren't supposed to see you guys.
No, nothing's happening. We're just trying to help David Willner with his link.
Oh, David.
David, yeah, link is not working. Let me go to email.
Can you still see?
Yeah, can you still see us?
Yeah, but they see this side. Over here, where the camera eye is.
Oh,
So you have to come
well,
over
can
here.
you see me? Can they see me?
I don't know.
Did they respond? Can you guys see me? Did they say anything?
Will they be starting on time?
I don't know.
We'll be starting later, I guess.
We don't know. It's black now.
Yeah, I know. Give me a minute.
1 second.
All right.
Can you see it now?
All right. Can you see it now? And could one of you send the link you're using to David Willner via WhatsApp? Try again.
You can't see? Wait, Mom, can you
Shit,
see
I knew
me?
I shouldn't have changed it.
Can you
What?
see me?
Okay now. It's okay now. Please send David Willner via the funeral WhatsApp thing the link. Thank you. All right, again, I want you to move 2 inches over. Thank you, so you don't kick this. Let me know if they text again.
Okay, good. Alright, I will see.
Yeah,
here.
we can see now. Yay!
That's good. Did you guys send the link to David Willner? Through WhatsApp? Can you guys send it? So you can watch too? Maybe? I think they heard that.
Yeah. Hearing everything we're saying right
Just aren't wet in my bed, Zoe. Oh my god, I'm gonna hit
Sent
Sent him back a message. Okay, thank you.
Shouldn't it be by
It's fine. Because she's in Israel. So she can contact him through message. My bracelet. You guys like my bracelet? My grandma gave it to me. It's made out of gold. That's not my grandma. My grandma's at like sleeping or something. My grandma. Do you know when they will be starting? In like 5 minutes when
Mia.
everyone gets here. I
Mia,
don't
be
know.
quiet. It's supposed to start at 12.
Stop, Zoe. Zoe, stop. Ow. Zoe. Sorry, Zoe just always has temper problems and she hits me and scratches my eyes and everything. Zoe, ow.
He's on his own, honey. That's right. There's not gonna be that many people. And she didn't even.
Stop.
I mean, she would have rather been sitting next to you.
Well, just
Careful.
oh, it's starting sooner because I think someone's at the.
Yeah, she hasn't gotten back to me about inviting me to this Sharon. I asked her to.
Oh, I don't know, but they see it, so.
My mom.
It's not like there's no.
You can see the top of the podium.
This doesn't work.
Right. But I'll.
Wait, Mom, can they see the top of the podium from where they're going?
We think that they will be able to, and when we
Because that
start,
person just came out and he was right there and we couldn't see past
I'm
him.
gonna sit where you're sitting, okay?
Where am I going to sit?
You're gonna sit next to me.
Can I sit here?
No, nobody's sitting here.
Can I sit here?
I think this one is reserved.
What?
This one's reserved.
It's reserved for us so we can video, sweetheart. You got it?
I don't think David got it because it says only one person is watching.
That's all of them? I don't know what's going on with my brother, and I have no way to. Does Daddy have WhatsApp on his phone?
Yes.
He does? Do you have WhatsApp on your phone? We do talk about that. Yeah. I don't know how to do that. They don't do it. And if I turn that off now, it's afraid it won't.
But your brother worked on
No. On here it just says one person is viewing, and that's Sharon's family. They're all together. So if David Novak or David Willner were on, it would say 3 or 2.
And you don't try to contact us.
No.
Okay. I'll just tell her.
Wait, what time is it? What time is it?
It's just about noon, but things never start on time.
So it's supposed to start an hour ago?
No, it's supposed to start in 3 minutes, but it won't start.
Okay, it's
right
gonna
on.
start in 3 minutes probably. Oh wait, 2 people are watching.
Oh, Mama, 2 people are watching.
Oh, now we have 2.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, so
David
step back.
Willner can see.
Okay,
Okay.
David Willner can see. We got David Willner and we got Sharon.
Hi.
Oh, they are?
What about David Novak?
Yeah, is David Novak watching this?
Can that go? You're FaceTiming to Israel.
I'm
Video.
YouTube streaming it. Yes.
Oh, see, YouTube, he can get on. You know what? Right?
Well, you can accept that.
I didn't want to have to be on the phone. Like,
Yeah, I don't
so
either.
I think we should just say whatever it's going to be. Is gonna be.
We're done. We're done. It's working, and there will be a recording that the funeral home is making that they can send out for after.
You know what?
But
Don't worry about it.
I don't want to mess with it now.
What are you seeing? Nothing.
You should be seeing a curtain.
Or me. Yeah.
Okay.
You should be seeing Mia.
Or Mia.
I'm sitting down. I think it's starting. See it. Okay, it's about to start.
Great.
Do you see it moving? And someone's coming out? Three people are watching.
Awesome.
Yes.
I think that's Avi Tall. Oh, 4 people are watching. Excellent.
Yeah. You can't see.
There's a friend of Miriam's who lives back east. And I don't know how to block phone calls, so hopefully that'll be the only one.
You can have your volume.
Everything's off. It didn't ring.
Okay.
It's just that the phone came through.
Right. I won't interrupt.
I have no way to block that. Sorry about that. There's like a link to go to see it. But
We don't know the link.
the link isn't on my phone. And nobody else has the link. Jeremy has the link, but I don't think he has his phone on him. He said about that like 11 o'clock last night, so we didn't have a chance to.
Wait, what's behind that?
There's a podium and the casket.
Is it open?
Meet and gold. Please don't do open casket.
Oh, that's what David did. Daddy's brother-in-law.
Oh, well,
Voicemail.
that's right. Daddy's brother-in-law was not Jewish. His family was Jewish. That's right.
YouTube is working. He's got it on YouTube.
Oh, you found it? You did like a search for it? Because it is public. You could try look for Liz.
I don't know. I just.
Liz's live stream.
Yes.
Anyway, he's got it. So.
Oh, where is he?
He's in Vermont.
Awesome. Oh, that's not David Novak.
Yes.
That is David Novak.
Oh, we know. He was part of the group.
What group?
So what is he asking you? Oh my goodness.
We made a group for people who were going to get the live stream.
What did he add? Okay, never mind. Great,
So
fantastic.
he has it because he had the link.
Thank you very much.
He was on the list.
Mom, are they gonna be standing over there?
No, they're going to be standing right there. Sorry about that.
No, it's not your fault.
Ladies and gentlemen, funeral services for Herschel Elkins are about to begin. They are being officiated by Rabbi Anthony Ellman. Before we start funeral services, please take a moment to take your cell phones and pagers and all other electronic devices and turn them off or put them into the silent or vibrate mode. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of Herschel's family. I'm going to start by reading Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsa, binoteshe yarbitseni, amei menukot yinahaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yanacheni v'magle tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam kelech begeit salmavet lo irara, ki ata imadi. Shivtacha u'mishantecha hema yanachamuni. Tarok lefanai shulchan neged sorarai. Tishatav Hashem en roshi, kosi revaya. Aktov v'chesed yirafuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And now Psalm 15, A psalm I feel is particularly appropriate for Herschel with his very particular ethical standard. Mizmor David, Adonai mi yagub ohalecha, mi ishkon bahar kodshecha, holech tamim ufoel tzedek, v'dover emet bilvavo, lo ragal al leshono, lo asa l'rehu ra'ah, v'chepa lo nasa al krovo, nivzeh be'einav nimas, v'et yireh Adonai yechabed, nishba lahara v'lo yamira, kaspo lo natan b'neshech, v'shocha al naki lo lakach, ose eileh, lo yimot leolam. Adonai, who shall sojourn in your tabernacle? Who shall dwell on your holy mountain? They who walk upright and work righteousness and speak the truth in their heart. They have no slander upon their tongue, nor do evil to their fellow, nor take up a reproach against their neighbor, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but they honor them that fear God. They that swear to their own hurt and change not, they that put not out their money on interest, nor take a bribe against the innocent. They that do these things shall never be moved. Would that Herschel was standing here now, speaking before you. He would speak with imagination, with inventiveness, with charm and with humor. His eyes would be bright, and in turn, we too would be charmed and our eyes would shine with pleasure. But Herschel is no longer with us, and we are here to bid him farewell and celebrate his life. A time of great sadness for Herschel's family, and also for all of us, for so many people who knew and loved, respected and enjoyed him. Herschel Theodore Elkins was born on July the 26th, 1929 in Brooklyn, New York, the only child of Seymour and Sophia. Seymour worked in a number of fields, not least as a highly successful shoe salesman. It was to his mother in particular that Herschel owed his lifelong involvement with Judaism. Before Herschel was born, Sophia had been involved in Jewish leadership circles and was secretary to Mordecai Kaplan.
Wow.
After several years in Brooklyn and then in the Bronx, when Herschel was 7 or so, the family set up home in Los Angeles, where his father had started a business. In his teens, Herschel became part of a group involved with Sinai Temple, later become president of a new Young Judea group, a role which included being the youth representative to the Young Zionist Action Committee. In 1956, not long before Herschel graduated law school at UCLA, he and Miriam met at a Zionist organization event. She was very drawn to his probity, his intelligence, his analytic thinking. They were married in 1958, starting a partnership that was to span 58 years. After passing the bar exam, Herschel joined the California Attorney General's office, where in 1965 he became head of the department's Consumer Law section, holding the lead position in consumer protection for over 40 years, not just administering the law, but developing it. Others will talk more about the way he fulfilled that role, his personality and skills and achievements. What he built up in California served as a model for other states. Wherever he saw injustice, he would pursue the perpetrators in whatever way his creative mind would think up. The embodiment of that great call of Torah, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. A famous commentary on the repeated word Tzedek, justice, teaches that justice must be pursued with justice. Put another way, justice needs to be a priority in all aspects of our life, not just in pursuing our goals in the public domain. This principle was a natural, ingrained part of who Herschel was. He lived to the highest ethical standards, acting honestly and honorably to the nth degree. In 2004, Herschel became a Special Assistant Attorney General, and retired in 2009. You can work out that was the year he turned 80. The recipient of a number of honors and an appointee to the State Accountancy Board. Retirement didn't end his involvement, and until quite recently, he lent his expertise on a voluntary basis. Turning to family life, Miriam and Herschel had 4 sons, David, Jeremy, Joel, and Jonathan. Tragically, Jonathan died at the age of 9. Zichrono livracha. Let me follow through the story of the family. David is married to Sharon, and they have 3 children, Yoni, Avital, and Galit. Jeremy is married to Karen, and they have a daughter, Alexa. In the next generation, Yoni and his wife Metal have a daughter, Hila, and Avital and her husband, Gilad, have 2 sons, Eitan and Roi. Professionally, the law seems to have taken a major role in the paths of David, Jeremy, and Joel. David teaches tax law, where he and his family this is one of those moments. Where he and his family live. Jeremy is a professor of political and legal theory, and Joel is an attorney. But don't imagine there's anything narrow or single-focused about this family. Herschel and Miriam's daughters-in-law are both psychotherapists. Jeremy is a psychoanalyst in training. Joel assists his mother in her translations of Hebrew books and does voluntary work overseas. Miriam is very drawn to the study of psychoanalysis, and she and David love studying and talking philosophy. This is no ordinary family. When Miriam and Herschel saw a need, they did something about it. For instance, when the first 2 boys were young, Miriam longed for intellectual stimulation. So she and Herschel got together a group of like-minded people and formed a book club, which has been meeting monthly for approaching 55 years. We will be hearing from a member of that club shortly. And when the boys were attending Orthodox day schools, Herschel and Miriam saw the need for the conservative community to have a day school. So they set about creating one that spanned Temple Betham, Sinai Temple and beyond. Not just planning it, but setting it up and managing it in a very hands-on way. Throughout their marriage, Herschel and Miriam have been part of the community of Betham, where Herschel served in a number of capacities, including head of its ritual committee. At some point, perhaps a quarter of a century ago, he and Miriam ventured downstairs to the library minyan and stayed. For many of us at Betham, Herschel's role of note, his star turn, has been his drush or sermon every year at the joyous occasion of Simchat Torah. For the last 20 and more years, his fertile, humorous imagination, combined with his brilliant speaking ability, would convulse the congregation in laughter. That was how I first became aware of him a little over a decade ago, through my tears of laughter as soon as I joined the community. Throughout his adult life, Herschel had a love of culture and an intellectual curiosity that drew him to study. In those and in so many other ways, he had the perfect partner in Miriam. My wife, Miriam, and I had the pleasure of participating in a weekly Talmud Chavruta group initiated by Marshall Kramer, that included Herschel and Miriam. One pattern from time to time in that group was that my Miriam would ask, "What's the issue behind this dispute? What's at stake here?" And Herschel, his eyes shining with pleasure, would proceed to unravel the complexity of what was going on. And we, in turn, would not only enjoy his explanation, but just loved listening to him spell it out. Herschel was only 13 years older than me, the same age as my eldest brother. But I and my wife, but Miriam, both experienced some kind of father figure in him. Herschel was, in my and Miriam's eyes, a unique man whom we both looked up to and loved. I have a strong sense that we were not alone in those feelings. Early this year, Herschel had a problem for which he underwent weeks of daily radiation therapy, losing towards the end of that time his ability to swallow and his ability to speak. You can guess what such an impediment meant to him. Yet he wrote emails about his condition and treatment with quiet stoicism and humour. The treatment was successful, speech and swallowing returned. All too soon, however, another bout of cancer brought him low. After tenaciously hanging on for weeks, he passed away last Friday afternoon, October the 7th, 2016, the 5th day of Tishrei, 5777. We mourn the passing of a good and beloved man. I now ask Jeremy Elkins to come to speak.
My father was a good man. Not in the diluted meaning of that word in an era of hype, not good in relation to the comparative and the superlative, good, better, best. I mean in the old-fashioned meaning of that term, as in something very basic, as in Aristotle's concern with what the good man does. Good as there is good in the world. Good as in the simple injunction, do good. As in Genesis, God saw it and it was good. My father believed in the good, in the simple good, and in its kin, the simple truth. And his abiding faith was in the simple truth of the simple injunction, do good. His belief in the good, his commitment to it, his anger at its violation, perhaps these beliefs were influenced in part by the world he saw around him growing up. Born 3 months before the great crash of 1929, his childhood was the Depression. There was the simple truth that surrounded him and which he witnessed, of lost savings, lives broken, bread lines. Then the New Deal, the simple good that responded to the simple truth. Lives broken, fix them. Men and women and children hungry, feed them. The elderly cannot sustain themselves, help them. How? Be imaginative, be bold, be eclectic, here and there, try this and that, but do what must be done. The simple good, the so very concrete good, the simple truth, the concrete truth. Closer to home, there were questions that did not lend themselves to such plain truths. His birth was a difficult one. As a result of complications, his mother, a woman with enormous vitality who was a rising star in the Zionist movement, had not only to undergo a hysterectomy, but would also suffer through the rest of her life constant pains and a growing noise in her head, and became, in my father's words, frail and sickly. My father was, it seems, made aware of this at an early age, that his mother's condition came about through his birth. And while his mother sought to conceal from her friends her pains, it could not have been but apparent to my father as a child. When my father was nearly 5, at that age at which Freud made famous, when little boys assert themselves, challenging their father's prerogatives and fearing loss of their father's love and of his retaliation, at this tender and difficult age, my grandfather abandoned him and his mother, without a word, without an explanation, without further correspondence. These are again my father's words. and left home for 2.5 years traveling west, ending up in Chicago and Los Angeles. Without financial support, my father and his mother were forced to move in with their sister and her family in a smallish apartment in the Bronx. As my father wrote, unable to return to her previous exciting life or her previous occupation as a social worker, and attempting to help out with expenses, she sold stockings door to door as often as her health would allow her to. My father, who had been a sickly child, had learned to take refuge in an imaginative world, and as the outside world became less reliable, he continued to find his haven in a world of imaginary cohorts and adventures. No one else was there from the real world, he would write. Throughout my childhood, I felt more comfort in my bed than anywhere else or with anyone else. This was true when I was 2. That was true when I was 10. I've quoted my father now several times. I should explain that these are from recollections that were a response to my request to both of my parents almost 20 years ago, that for my upcoming birthday they would write about what I call their intellectual history, by which I meant their understanding of how they came to think about the world as they did. In the days before my father's death, we sat in his hospital room, unsure of whether or not he was aware of our presence or of our words, and read these recollections, almost 40 pages, single-spaced, from childhood to his engagement, aloud. We were each struck by many things about them, including the sense of loneliness, of grief, and of his struggle to find a place in the world and to make sense of it. A world whose foundation was shrouded in mystery and danger. An innocent child whose very first act resulted in the lifelong debilitation of his mother, this is how he understood it, and the foreclosure of siblings. The most innocent and healthy assertion of self and such dire consequences, and the mystery of his father that haunted so much of his early life. Who is this man, and why did he leave so suddenly? There is a keen sense of admiration for him, for this figure who played at being larger than life, adventurer, teller of tall tales, arrogant and brash, self-absorbed and temperamental, but also a man of extraordinary talents and with the charm of the salesman that he was. The mystery of his father's desertion was exacerbated by the secrecy that surrounded it. His mother did not tell him of the truth of it until he was in college. Instead, she merely explained that his father was no longer living with them because he was working in Brooklyn. My father surely knew this was not the truth, and that the truth could not be spoken. And so, as children do, he simply pushed it aside. 60 years later, he would write with astonishment that not once did I ask, nor do I remember wondering why, if he was in Brooklyn, he never visited us. When 2.5 years later, his father sent for them from Los Angeles, and my father and his mother, against the advice of her family, arrived after the long train ride across country, my father did not recognize his father on the platform, though he pretended he did. He soon found himself living in an apartment with no furniture, and for years, as my grandfather was building a business, they moved from apartment to apartment, and my father from school to school, rarely making a friend, nervous about asserting himself too forcefully, and instead taking, as he put it, echoing his mother's assessment of him, taking always the path of least resistance. There is in his early recollections no sense of joy, no sense of play, except by himself. A 7.5-year-old child displaced now twice, with parents who wanted him to be an adult before he had had a chance to be a child. He continued to find comfort in his internal world. In his relation to the external world, he struggled. He procrastinated and he wondered why. Nothing mattered too much. As with Hamlet, he might have said, I do not know why yet I live to say, this thing's to do. He had no idea what he wished to do with his life. No project seemed compelling. He took on friendships when they came to him, often through the mediation of his mother. And when in college, he started to date, but he shied away from commitments, and for decades after, he would wonder why. At his parents' urging, he tried violin, but he had no passion or perseverance. He did not practice and soon dropped it. Similarly with foreign languages, which required more of a commitment than he wished to give, and with school in general. He had a good number of successes and experiences that he found fulfilling. He took on leadership positions in Zionist youth groups, drama productions, and he was good at them. He had a small circle of friends. Yet in his recollection of these years, there is a sense of being adrift, alone even when he was with friends, of not quite fitting in, of not knowing quite how to fit in, or what it even meant to fit in, not having someone to rely on, something solid to hold him, some concrete truth, a concrete presence, nothing solid outside and nothing solid inside. He was drafted into the army but had no inclination for army life. As usual, he felt alone and sent long letters home, which we have, in which my family also read at his bedside. When through luck and army incompetence he found himself with several months of furlough, he traveled mostly alone. When he entered the army, he still had no idea what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. But while in the army, he began to daydream about law. That is what happened. He daydreamed about law. Such a striking thing. To retreat into the inner world, a world of fantasy and wish fulfillment, and there to think about law. He could not explain why. Perhaps it was in part a reaction to the distress he reported feeling at witnessing his first race riot between white soldiers in his segregated company and black soldiers of a different company. I thought I knew the people I had roomed with for 3 months. Apparently not, he wrote. It affected him deeply, quote, because it was racial, perhaps because we were older, perhaps because this was unexpected, perhaps because I was in the midst of it and felt so helpless. This was an era of deep faith in the idea of law as a force for good, for what might be called the plain good, the concrete good, the good that called out for vindication. There was the law invoked in the Nuremberg trials, not for violations of any statute or treaty, but for crimes against humanity, crimes said to be too clear to need to rest on such codes. Violations not for, in the language of law, malum prohibitum, wrong or evil because prohibited by law, but malum in se, evil or wrong in itself, simply wrong. The justice of Nuremberg rested on plain truths that could not be denied by civilized people. But there were other statements of plain truth that needed to be invoked against the arrogance and power and casuistry of those who claimed civility itself. Statements of the good so simple that they ought not to have been needed to have been said, and yet in their simplicity reaffirmed the idea that there is such a thing as good in the world. Statements such as that uttered by the United States Supreme Court at the end of my father's first year in law school, that it could no longer be denied a system of public education that segregates race is inherently unequal. It was this idea of law, this promise of the simple good that could stand against the arrogance, the narcissism of power, that came to be my father's abiding belief. In law school, he found his path. He enjoyed law school more than he had ever enjoyed school in the past, and he devoted himself to it. When he took his first exam, he worried he might not pass. He received the highest grade in the class, as he would again and again and again, and would finish law school second in his graduating class. After graduating from law school and on a whim, he took the exam that was used to hire for state attorneys. A fellow law student a year ahead of him suggested the Attorney General's office. He had little interest, but went for an interview all the same and was immediately hired. He thought he would take the job while he decided what he really wanted to do. It did not take him long to realize he had found his place. It involved, he wrote, the practice of law and not the search for clients, and it had the potential for a search for justice. And to boot, it enabled me to keep Shabbat and the holidays. And while, as he wrote, I had not sought the job, nor even at that time thought what impression it might make on my father, nonetheless, as he moved from the criminal division to the civil division and from antitrust to head the newly formed consumer fraud section, which he built and would lead for 4 decades, he found too his father's admiration. With poignancy, my father recalled that in the last 2 years of his life, that is his father's life, with severe diabetes, walking with a cane, in pain with thick cataract glasses, and hiring someone to drive his large battered car and traveling to florists in an extended area, selling pottery and florist materials with that salesman smile and salesman technique, he carried my picture and articles in the newspaper, quoting me, and showed them to all his customers. My father admired his father's talents and spirit, his desire for adventure, his brashness. But perhaps from having seen the collateral damage to his mother and himself, he also carried a deep distrust of the spectacular, the too much, too showy, too mystical, too abstract, too ungrounded in the concrete, too unrestrained, too dangerously excessive. Although he was solicited more than once to run for public office, he was not interested. He had no taste for the dissemblance, the hype, the unsavoriness of the deals with the devil, the pretense, the self-promotion. He could be rather devious himself in the service of the cause. He was proud of the creative ways he found through settlements and such to fund new consumer protection initiatives. But he liked the honesty of civil service, and he believed in the old progressivist idea of a public good, a good that was concrete and above politics. He spoke proudly of the support that he received from various AG and gubernatorial administrations, both Democratic and Republican. In California, there's a statute that prohibits unfair competition. And for years, ever since the AG's office persuaded courts to read that section as prohibiting practices that harm not only competitors, but also consumers, the question was raised about how to interpret the meaning of unfair. Businesses argued that the standard was too vague. But for my father, it was simple. Unfair has an easy scientific definition, he wrote. It is when the evidence is presented and the only reasonable response is, my God, that's unfair. That was his personal creed and compass, not abstract jurisprudence, but the concrete, the my God, that's unfair. For nearly a half a century as head of the consumer fraud section, that was his standard, and he used his gifted legal imagination in pointing to the unfair and the concrete harm of concrete victims. Not for purposes of rhetoric or symbolism, not principally as an example, but as the thing itself, the concrete malum in se. This was the demand that he believed was placed upon the law. That was its promise and commitment. And if the law in its present state was not equipped to respond to those harms, it needed to be improved so that it would. Thus came the pioneering statutes and the careful building of case law. To refashion the law so that it could take cognizance of the concrete good took vision and perseverance. This was no longer the child who took the path of least resistance, the boy who feared conflict, the adolescent adrift, the soldier who felt helpless watching a race riot among the troops. This was the man, grown now into his own, who bristled at the seemingly infinite number of ways that could be devised to cheat people, who took to protect them, and who had the maturity and fortitude to continue to create new ways of doing so. In this, he found his life's passion, his ground, his this things to do, and his cause and strength and will and means to do it. But behind all the legal imagination, creativity, pluck, and laser focus was always the individual victim, the concrete harm, the simple truth. He tells the story, I quote him, of a company that took advantage of immigrants who were told they could deliver packages to relatives in Vietnam, packages often containing life-saving goods. The company left the goods in a warehouse. When the warehouse was not paid, it planned to sell the goods to pay for the storage fees. My father's section could have sued the company for its misrepresentation and left it at that. No doubt there are prosecutors who would do just that. Here's what my father's section did. Quote, although our State Department did not at that time recognize Vietnam, and although it was thought the goods, if ever delivered, would be kept by the Vietnamese government, we arranged, this is the consumer fraud section of the California Attorney General's office, we arranged through the cooperation of an airline and a charitable corporation and small contributions by some of the victims to have the goods delivered directly to the families in Vietnam. It was this idea of law, this promise of the simple good that could stand against the arrogance, the narcissism of power, that was my father's abiding belief. We hear so much talk today of the dangers of governmental interference with business or the need to let unregulated markets run on its own, and that every attempt to do good causes harm. We hear it right now in the fight over the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to regulate payday loans and the assertions that limiting loans of 400% a year will hurt people that the pre-bill is meant to help. When I hear that kind of talk, I think of my father. Not only because I know the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a late child of the consumer movement in which he was a pioneer, but because all of his professional life he was dedicated to the idea that there is such a thing in the world as good, and that it can be stated in facts, in the number of people who have lost their life savings to a scam or in an interest rate. I can hear in my mind my father saying 400% with the absolute knowledge that in a fact is the good. How many people lost their savings from this or that scheme? How many people bought cars with this many problems? How many people were convinced to buy this or that they didn't need by salespeople who had incentives to mislead? These facts, once stated and shown, were their own argument. QED, quod erat demonstratum. It has been demonstrated. There is decency, there is good, and then there's this, QED. Through this commitment, he built his reputation. I remember once as a graduate student going to dinner with a friend who invited a former college classmate of his, a lawyer in Massachusetts, to join us. Over dinner, his friend mentioned that he was working in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Oh, which section? I said. Consumer protection. Oh, what a coincidence. My father works in consumer protection in the California AG's office. Really, what's his name? Herschel Elkins. There was a silence, like one of those old E.F. Hutton commercials. As though I had just remarked that I'd been boating with the Queen of England. After a moment, Herschel Elkins, your father is a legend in our office. He was a local celebrity growing up. I would be thrilled when he came to our school to give talks, when we heard him on the radio or watched him on television. While the young lawyer with whom I had dinner left his work in the Massachusetts AG's office to do honest but more lucrative work, my father stayed on in the office in which he had already worked his entire professional life and from which he would retire after half a century of service. He loved the idea of law as a statement of decency. And he also, I think, loved being so good at it, though he would rarely say so directly. What we as children learned from him were simple truths. Truths that he did not teach, not in words anyway. Perhaps most of all, a kind of integrity. There was the idea of public service, which for him meant exactly what it said, no less. It's a relationship between the self and others, in which the very fact that something is of benefit or harm to others is a motivating reason for action. When I hear of public officials using their office for personal gain or sacrificing the public interest for personal ambition, I cannot quite understand it. How is it possible to go into public service and not think first about the public? These are in a way silly questions. But there's a part of me that simply cannot fathom it. And I know that this is because there's a part of my father that could not fathom it. My father, for whom the thought, should I do such a thing, never entered his mind. For whom the idea of the public good was one of those facts that was too simple to need proof. QED. In his personal life, he scorned the showy, the fashionable, the fancy. He was suspicious of what was arrogant, fancy, glitzy, of personal ego and what it could take with it. He wore 1960s shiny suits with narrow lapels, through the big lapel, flashy double-knit days of the 70s, trading them in just about the time they were coming back. I remember his bragging to me years ago how he could buy ties at Save On for less than $5. His tastes and his habits were simple. For over 4 decades, he met, as you've heard, every Saturday with a Swimmers group. For 5.5 decades, he, with my mother, met monthly with the book club that they co-founded. He and my mother had season tickets to numerous little theaters, which he preferred to the large stage productions. And he was so pleased to have my brother Joel so close by, to drop over many times a week, to talk sports, law, and the affairs of the world. He loved to perform. I remember as a child listening to his reading Shalom Aleichem stories during Oneg Shabbat at Temple Beth Am, and as you've heard already, his annual Simchat Torah send-up drashes. I recall once the pride I felt when I overheard 2 students at the University of Judaism, where I was taking classes in the evening, talking about going to Temple Beth Am for Simchat Torah and hearing the comedian they hired to give the drash. That's no comedian, I thought. That's my father. The pleasure he took in giving speeches on consumer protection, the regular appearances on the old Michael Jackson talk show on a KABC radio. I'm too young to have remembered his dramatic performances on the 1950s show Day in Court, but I know how he enjoyed them. These were among his pleasures, simple pleasures. He liked to travel with my mother, yet spiritually and psychically, he liked to stay close at home. And when it came to his internal life, well, he kept that mostly internal. He remained more comfortable with adults than with children. He never did quite find his childhood, and he could not quite trust to give himself over to others, and so to experience the full pleasures of play. But he remained alive to the creative spirit. He loved great fiction and great music and great theater, and he was himself a fine writer of poetry, songs, and other creative works. He loved to wrestle with the mysteries of the Tanakh, and even in his hospital room, as I read to him a short story by Mark Twain, he insisted on a piece of paper and pen on which he laboriously wrote, the mysteries of brilliant writing. In all this, he delighted to see, as Benjamin Cardozo once wrote of legal judgment himself, that our little parish has its vistas that lie open to the infinite. But even in peeping into the Empyrean, it was important always for him to feel the terra firma beneath, the world grounded, graspable, reliable, and concrete.
Is Al Sheldon here? Al was a long-time colleague of Herschel's at the department. He succeeded Herschel as head of the section in 2004, having worked with Herschel there for 25 or more years, when Herschel was elevated to the position of Special Assistant Attorney General. So Al had many years' experience working with Herschel as a colleague.
I apologize for some repetition. I first met Herschel in November of 1972. It was while I was interviewing for a job in the consumer law section of the California Attorney General's office. I didn't know who he was. I couldn't look him up on the internet because, of course, there was no internet. But there was Herschel, and he was very impressive in that interview. So when he offered me the job, because I had been smitten by his character and his thoughts, I jumped at it. In January 1973, I started working for, or I should really say with him. I was only 28 years old at the time, and he was a grown-up, or at least as much of a grown-up as he was ever to become. And as I got to know him better, I decided I wanted to be Herschel when I grew up, and I still do. I say worked with rather than for Herschel because he always treated his staff as if we were his equal, when none of us ever came close. I and many others learned how to be an attorney, and others how to be investigators and consumer protection specialists for the public good from Herschel. He was our Yoda. He taught us how to use the power of the law to help people. He made us the lawyers we became, not by telling us what to do or how to act or how to negotiate with scumbag defendants or their attorneys, but by showing us how to do these things. He wasn't afraid to make the tough decision. The buck did stop with him, but he got us where we needed to be, not by fiat, but by helping us think through problems and consider various ramifications. He taught us, and then he gave us room to spread our wings and fly. And he supported and protected us through numerous, 9 I believe, attorneys general. Not only those who recognized that the consumer law section was doing important work that protected and bettered the lives of the citizens in California and the entire United States, but also from attorneys general who mostly thought of us as a nuisance. He told us we would know we got it right and were doing the job as we should be doing it, because at that point, he said, we would be individually sued by some defendant who we had either sued or were in negotiations with. Herschel made many of us a part of his extended family, and Miriam accepted us, Herschel's adoptees, with open arms. It made our hearts swell, and so we wanted to do even more to make him proud of us. We shared with him his joys and sadnesses, and he and Miriam shared ours with us. Some of us refer to him as our or the rabbi. Some of the most fascinating and thought-provoking conversations I personally had with him over the 44-plus years that I was privileged to know him dealt with issues of Judaism, philosophical issues, meaning and interpretation issues, and for me, day-to-day synagogue operational issues, like helping me think through a number of issues when I was my synagogue's president and head of its rabbinic search committee. He had a few things to say about what to look for in an incoming rabbi. In the world of consumer protection in the United States, Herschel had no peer. When he started doing consumer protection work, there was no such section in California or any other state. And although, as you've already heard, he joined the office in 1956, it really wasn't until the mid-60s that Herschel really went to work. This happened when the governor approved funds for the creation of a consumer protection unit after the Watts riots, and a California report that mirrored the Kerner Commission's report following riots in other cities. These concluded that one of the causes of these riots was the frustration of citizens who lived in these areas caused by businesses that were engaging in unscrupulous and fraudulent business activities. And, as we all know, he was ever tenacious. Filing lawsuits when needed, drafting and lobbying for legislation when it was needed, and filing a series of lawsuits involving the same unscrupulous practices when that was what was needed in order to show the legislature that new laws were needed. And he was always cajoling federal and state agencies and prosecutors to get on board and do what was right for the people. And it was his life's work because he was indignant that people cheated and took advantage of other people, and because he wanted to put an end to this as best he could so that the world would be a better place. Herschel became the first head of the consumer section, as you heard, when it was created in 1964 and remained in that position until 2004. From the time he was put in charge, he immediately started looking at things the office could do to help fight unscrupulous and fraudulent activities. He went to work and truly created both a position and a section within the California Attorney General's office. Early on, Herschel recognized that a consumer section in the Attorney General's office in a state the size of California could not do all the work that was needed to be done alone, and so he devised a plan to show the need to get more attorneys assigned to consumer protection work. Being as ever creative and always thinking self, as you've already heard, Herschel started using the press, TV and radio to supply consumer tips, doing interviews and giving out generic consumer information, including having a regular call-in spot on the LA talk show hosted by the other Michael Jackson. And he even starred in a 16mm film entitled, "This is Fraud." He did so much of this public appearance and communications work that he had to get an AFTRA card. He would cover LA giving speeches at community centers, at senior citizen centers, and at private homes in ghetto areas of the city. All of this to generate consumer complaints so that he could show the AG, the governor, and the legislature that more needed to be done. And he got laws passed that allowed district attorneys and city attorneys in the state's largest cities to bring the types of suits that the Attorney General could bring. Then he taught the DAs and the city attorneys how to bring such suits. And he taught those offices and the Attorney General's office how to work together. And when other states saw the successes and benefits of what Herschel was doing, other attorneys generals throughout the country started consumer law sections within their own offices. And Herschel got the other AGs to work together when there was a national problem that needed addressing, but was being ignored by federal agencies. He was responsible for getting myriad laws that protected consumers passed by the California legislature. And he had the consumer section bring lawsuits and file amicus briefs in private lawsuits and in lawsuits brought by DAs and city attorneys that made California law the leader in the nation in the area of consumer protection law. He was truly the consumer protection lawgiver. There were so many more than 10 that I couldn't even start to enumerate them. But I will tell you one story that shows you how important Herschel was. I remember once when I wrote a bill with Herschel's guidance, assistance, and judicious editing. Since he thought I had done a job so well in the assembly when he accompanied me to the first hearing where the bill passed out of committee, he decided that I could handle the legislative hearing in the Senate by myself. So off I went to Sacramento. Well, one legislator started asking ridiculous questions that amounted to no more than, why do we call the color red, red? Well, the chair of the committee, who saw that I was about to explode and that the questioning senator was not going to accept anything I said, banged his gavel and said, I think we should put this hearing over for 2 weeks while the AG and Senator X hash out their differences. I left the hearing room and immediately called Herschel on a payphone. He told me to calm down and everything would be fine. I told him I needed help. Well, during the next 2 weeks, we never called the senator, and he never called us. When the next hearing came, Herschel went with me to Sacramento. When our bill was called, we went up to the table. As we were sitting down, Senator Roberti, a member of the committee, said, I see we have Mr. Elkins with us here today. Tell me, Mr. Elkins, do we need this piece of legislation to help California consumers? Herschel said, yes. The chair stood up and walked out. This is but one of many examples that show the stature, respect, and authority that Herschel carried in the California legislature through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, while he was writing the ever-expanding canon of California consumer law. Unfortunately, he was so good at it that businesses started going to Congress to pass laws weaker than the laws passed by California and some other states in the consumer law area, and having these national laws, which were weaker, attempt to preempt our state laws. Herschel was able to define and lead the construction of consumer law, even though during most of the 40 years he was head of the section. We seldom had more than 10 to 12 attorneys and 5 to 6 investigators and consumer protection specialists working in the state statewide. He was able to do this, he said, because we kept moving the tanks around. In addition to the too many to mention awards and accolades that Herschel received during his career, in 2002, Herschel was named the California State Bar Public Lawyer of the Year. In presenting Herschel with this award, then Chief Justice Ronald George said, among other things, "Every day, consumers who deal with obtaining credit, who seek housing, purchase automobiles or other retail goods, enter into health club and dance studio contracts, hire contractors to do home repair work, or encounter door-to-door salesmen, have Herschel Elkins to thank for increasing consumer protection and ensuring California's leadership role in this area of the law." In closing, on behalf of everyone who was ever privileged to have Herschel as their boss, colleague, and friend, I want to say to Herschel, because I know this neshama is still connected to us, and to Miriam, and to their children, David, Joel, and Jeremy, and to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that you should know that those of us who were fortunate enough to not only work with Herschel in the AG's office, but to know him as a friend, recognize how lucky we were to be touched and inspired by him, because he is truly a unique and remarkable man who has made each of our lives more meaningful for knowing him. And you should also know that there are countless other people who although they do not know Herschel by name, but only by reputation, also appreciate that their lives were touched by him and what he created. But even more, you should know that there are millions of people in California and the nation whose lives he made better by the work he did for them, even though they do not know how their help came about or that he was responsible for it. May his memory endure in your lives and in all of our lives as an inspiration for commitment to his ideals and integrity.
Amen.
Jeremy, sorry, Joe, I call on you now.
As anyone who spent more than a few minutes with my father can testify, he loved telling stories, mostly about his life. And if you'd notice, most of his stories had an unspoken theme. It was almost like before each story you could insert the phrase, "I was so lucky that," although, as I found out much later, his life growing up was far from perfect, as my brother Jeremy has explained. And yet the stories he told almost always focused on the positive. Whereas some parents would tell their kids stories of how they would have to walk 5 miles in the snow, uphill in both directions to get to school, he would gloat that when he went to UCLA as an undergrad, he could leave the house 10 minutes before his first class, find free parking on a dirt field, and still get to class on time. His tuition was $17 per semester, which included tickets to all the basketball and football games. After undergraduate school, he was drafted into the Korean War, but because of a series of fortunate events, he wasn't shipped off to Korea, but instead spent the war with the occupying forces in Germany, working as a lab assistant in an army hospital. I've heard him tell the story so many times of how he became a lab assistant. I can picture the exact words and mannerisms he used when he told anyone who was unfortunate enough to ask. How he inquired of one of the sergeants one day why he was given that position. The sergeant looked at his file and explained, "Anyone with a science degree was sent to the hospital." "But I don't have a science degree," he said. The sergeant replied, "It says right here, you have a degree in political science." I wonder if that sergeant ever imagined that for the next 70 years he would star as the butt of my father's preeminent story on Army stupidity. And he used this opportunity to travel throughout Europe on 3-day passes, and when he finished his stint, the GI Bill paid for his law school at UCLA when he returned. He would tell the story how he just happened to stumble in what he considered the greatest job, the only one he would ever hold as a lawyer. That job in the California Attorney General's office, which he originally reluctantly agreed to commit to for 2 years, he ended up holding for over 50. He was extremely proud of his role in helping craft California's consumer protection section, which began with just a few attorneys to become what is today one of the largest and most consumer-friendly in the country. He loved that he would never have to worry about finding clients, that he could choose which cases he wanted to pursue and which litigation he wanted to support or initiate. He never lost the zeal for his job, working well past the age when most people retire. After he had already qualified for a full pension, he would still leave for his office at around 7:30 each morning with the brown bagged lunch prepared to him by my mother. And perhaps most important, he lucked into finding a perfect partner for life. He didn't have to look far. She hung out in the same circles. Their parents had known each other before they themselves had ever met. But that union lasted 58 years. In certain ways, they complemented each other. In certain ways, they were very similar. They both had an endless zeal for learning. When we were kids, we always knew that Saturday afternoon he would go off to his Chumash group. And the third Saturday night of each month, the two of them would go to their book club. While the Chumash group eventually disbanded, the book club recently celebrated its 55th anniversary with most of the original members. A few years ago, they started up another Torah study group, which again meets every Saturday afternoon at their house, this time women included. When they got frustrated at the lack of a non-Orthodox option for Jewish day schools, they started LA's first conservative day school, Akiba Academy, and enrolled me as the first student. I've heard my father proudly tell the story of organizing a meeting of the leaders of the LA conservative movement and telling them, you can join us or not, but this is going to happen with you or without you. Of those first few months, when construction wasn't completed yet at Sinai Temple, so they had to hire taxis to shuttle students to the temporary facilities at Temple Beth El, so parents wouldn't find out that the school was behind schedule. Of the first year, when my parents would organize the accounts payable on the kitchen table to determine which got paid that month. He was very proud that the first two rules they established for the running of the school were that teachers would always get paid first, before any other expenses, and that no one, except the select committee, would know which students were receiving financial aid. They shared a love for small theater, subscribing to a number of different companies, in addition to going to random other performances at other theaters. My dad, ever the record keeper, has a list of every play they'd ever seen and has saved every playbill, organized alphabetically in his file cabinet. Of course, they didn't share every interest. My mother never understood his interest in sports. He wasn't that much into baseball generally, but he was a lifelong fan of the Dodgers, who, like me, were a transplant from Brooklyn to LA. He wasn't a big football or basketball fan, but he enthusiastically rooted for UCLA, and he passed both those passions on to me. We would also often have to time our sports talks while my mom was out of the room, lest we be made fun of. In fact, when I would visit him in the hospital towards the end, he would ask me how the Dodgers did the night before, even though he knew deep down that he wouldn't likely see the end of the season. He was also an avid follower of tennis, the sport he played in high school. I never got to see him play. He already had a bad knee by the time we were born. But in the summer, when we were kids, he would flash his moves at the backyard ping pong table. Sometimes he frustrated my mom by his lack of expressiveness. I can't remember him ever telling us that he loved us or was proud of us. But all you had to do was listen when he talked about us to others to know that he did, and he was. Although he loved to tell stories and share his deep knowledge of history and Judaica, he never lectured about principles, preferring to teach by example. I never met a man with more integrity. He refused to use his position for his benefit. I remember a long time ago, after settling a big class action lawsuit with Levi Jeans, he would not let us file a claim for a coupon because he didn't want to give the impression of conflict of interest. I doubt he ever cheated on his taxes or on anything else. His conscience just wouldn't let him. He was a man of principle, the first being never to pay for parking. He never gave money to people on the street, even though it would be easy to do so, because he was told that was counterproductive, but instead donated regularly and very quietly to homeless shelters, food banks, and other charities. And perhaps, most importantly, he always had a sense of humor, as you all know. As he lay in his hospital room toward the end, the doctor was discussing with us how we should treat the pneumonia, which was causing him so much discomfort. He signaled for his clipboard and pen and carefully scribbled, "Ask Clinton's doctor." That may have been the last joke he ever told. Like so many Jews have done throughout the ages, it was a sense of humor that allowed him to see the positive over the negative, thereby giving us and everyone he met the impression that he was, or at least considered himself, the luckiest guy on the face of the earth. And whether or not he made his own luck, perhaps he was.
Call on David Elkins to speak next.
When my kids were little, every time we came for a visit, you would take them to Disneyland. Once I asked them if they really liked Disneyland so much. They said no, but we go because Saba likes it. Well, it turned out you did not particularly like Disneyland. So that was the last time they went. But they were basically right. You may not like Disneyland, but you like taking your grandchildren to Disneyland because you thought that was what they wanted. And if they wanted it, that was good enough for you. You were a giver. You spent your professional life helping others. Your family life was one of giving whatever you could. When you were little, you read us stories. I remember you reading us Winnie the Pooh, one on the right, one on the left, one behind you looking over your shoulder. Every chapter would rotate. I remember lying in bed and you sitting in the closet with the light on, singing us songs. It didn't stop when we grew up. Once you recorded the entire book as a driven leaf and sent it to us on audio cassettes. Sharon and I spent many hours listening to it. Even though you were so far away, I felt like you were right there. You always seemed to have the answer to any question. And when you didn't know, you knew how to find it. You stimulated in me a lifelong desire to learn and to know about anything and everything. I would often find myself wondering, what would you say about that? Last year, I asked you to go over an article I'd written. It involved a topic that was far from your field of expertise. But you read it carefully and said that a part of it didn't belong to the main argument. I went over it, and you were absolutely right. It didn't belong. During these last few months, as your body succumbed to the ravages of earthly existence, you did not abandon your role as a provider. Your last oral communications, before you stopped being able to speak, concerned making sure that Mama would have what she needed after you were gone. As long as you retained your good-natured sense of humor, and I was going to tell the story about Clinton's doctor, so we can go over that. It was absolutely amazing at that point, at the most somber point when they're asking those difficult questions, and you had to tell that joke. That same night, we did Kabbalat Shabbat and Kiddush at the hospital. You couldn't sing, of course, but you held the Siddur and followed along with us. And you declined the offer of pouring some grape juice into your feeding tube. And that evening reminded me so much of the Seder that we had 36 years ago in the same hospital for what turned out to be Jonathan's last Pesach. Well, that Friday night was the last time that you were fully lucid. And 3 weeks later, your body finally took its last breath. Wherever you are now, know that you'll always be with us. Teheh nishmatcha tzrua b'tzror chaim.
Miriam's words will be spoken by her friend, my my wife, Rabbi Miriam Glaser. We're under pressure of time, and there'll be a little bit more after Miriam has read these words. We'll have El Mali Rachamim, and then move out to the graveside. There'll be a little bit more there.
These are Miriam's words. I can't recall when it all started, but I do remember that when I was in labor with our first child, 10 months after we were married, Herschel tried to distract me with something by Dostoevsky or Chekhov. I don't think I was concentrating very much at that point. His love affair with Russian literature began, as he told me, during his undergraduate years at UCLA, where he selected his elective courses based on the classrooms which could hold the fewest number of students, thus guaranteeing a more meaningful learning experience. Herschel loved reading, and he loved reading aloud. And amazingly, he loved reading aloud to me. The mind-numbing task of folding diapers was no chore at all in the company of the brothers Karamazov. Cleaning the kitchen for Passover was made joyful against the background of crime and punishment. He was not content with one version of the original Russian text. He was fascinated by different translations from different time periods. Nor did he restrict himself to the Russians. As I was digging up our front lawn to make way for a drought-resistant garden, I was privileged to be granted the gift of Milton Steinberg's As a Driven Leaf. We enjoyed a perfect partnership. As Herschel liked to say, she does the work and I read to her. And read he did. Every word of James Joyce's Ulysses, Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, Moby Dick, very long novels, and very short stories. I went through the inevitable needlepoint stage, a tablecloth, a challah cover, a tally bag for my grandson's bar mitzvah. I found myself seeking out new sewing projects simply as a pretext to be with him, to be read to. It was as if this time as teacher, he had found the classroom with the fewest number of students, namely one, namely me, and remain there to my eternal gratitude for the rest of his life.
I now invite Rabbi Adam Klickfeld to sing El Mali Rachamim, our prayer for the departed. I'd like to ask all those who are able comfortably, please stand.
El Mali Rachamim, Shochein Bameromim, Amtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Shechina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim U'Tohorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Tzvi Ben Shimon, Shalach Le'olamo, Began Eden Tehei Menuchato, Ana Balarachamim, Hastireu Beseter Knafecha, Le'olamim, Utzeror Betzrachim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'shalom Amishkavo, V'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Herschel Elkins, Tzvi ben Shimon, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May Herschel's soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And we say amen.
Please be seated.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Shiva after the funeral services today and tomorrow will be held at the Elkins family home at 6341 Maryland Drive in Los Angeles. Maps are available. Minion services will be held at the following times. Tonight at 6 p.m., plus Shacharit services tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. and Mincha at 2 p.m. If you want to make a donation in the memory of Herschel, please make it out to Bet Tzedek. The following people have been designated as active casket bearers, and they should come up to the casket right now as I name them. They are David Elkins, Jeremy Elkins, Joel Elkins, Barry Rosenblatt, Bruce Newman, Marshall Kramer, Jack Jay, Al Sheldon, and 2 honorary casket members, Marvin Halperin and Ben Kagan. Please come forward. And everybody else shall follow us out. Thank you.